President Donald Trump's short list to replace Jerome Powell as Federal Reserve Chair has turned into a long list of nearly a dozen possible candidates. Among them are current and former Fed officials, prominent economists, and a couple market-focused hopefuls, each with ideas about where the central bank should be headed at a critical juncture for monetary policy. For most of them, the views coalesce around a need to lower the Fed's benchmark interest rate, and some believe the changes must go beyond that and into the fundamental way it does business. In interviews that stretch back days, weeks, and even months, the candidates have talked in depth about where they think the Fed should go. Former Governor Kevin Warsh has called for regime change. Market strategists David Zervas and Rick Rieder think rates can be lowered aggressively. Former St. Louis Fed President James Bullard stressed Fed independence and commitment to core central bank goals, while National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett bemoaned the lack of transparency behind the Federal Open Market Committee's decisions. Governor Michelle Bowman spoke on the importance of listening to a wide range of views, including Trump's. Economist Mark Summerlin called the Fed's benchmark rate just too high, and former Governor Larry Lindsey said the lack of intellectual diversity has led the FOMC to be consistently wrong in its decisions. As the candidates jockey, Trump has not publicly set a timetable for a decision to replace Powell, whose term as chair ends in May 2026. The president previously has said he will nominate economist Stephen Miron for a current board vacancy. The Trump administration is considering 11 candidates to replace Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell when his term expires in May, including 3 who have not previously been publicly named, according to 2 administration officials who declined to be named. 1. Michelle Bowman, Fed Board of Governors member and Vice Chair of Supervision. 2. James Bullard, former President of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. 3. Kevin Hassett, Director of the National Economic Council. 4. David Zervas, Chief Market Strategist for Jefferies. 5. Philip Jefferson, Fed Board of Governors member and Vice Chair. 6. Larry Lindsey, former Fed Board of Governors member. 7. Lori Logan, President of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. 8. Rick Rieder, BlackRock Chief Investment Officer for Global Fixed Income. 9. Mark Summerlin, former Deputy Director of the National Economic Council. 10. Christopher Waller, Fed Board of Governors member. 11. Kevin Warsh, former Fed Board of Governors member. President Donald Trump recently told in an interview that Kevin Hassett, Director of the National Economic Council, and former Fed Governor Kevin Warsh were among those on his list. The officials described a deliberative process, where Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent will interview all of the candidates, winnow down the list and pass on a final list to the president for his decision. The size of the list and the process described suggest a decision is not imminent and could take a considerable amount of time. But the officials would not offer a timetable. The longer the process takes, the less likely there is to be a so-called shadow Fed chair in place for several months before Powell leaves, which some have suggested would be disruptive for monetary policy. Though sharply critical, on an almost daily basis, of Powell, Trump has backed off suggestions he might replace the Fed chair before the end of his term in May. While many of the candidates have advocated various levels of reform at the Fed, most have supported its independence and have experience in monetary policy and financial markets.